First taking all the clothes and asking for money and jewelry and everything and pushing people around.
But they ran out of bullets before they had everyone killed. So now they began to chop loose with the little axes they carry in their belts and with bayonets.
The gendarmes came and picked up all the boys between 5 and 10 years old, threw us into a pile. And I happened to be one of the first ones, and I was at the bottom of the pile. After they had all the boys in this pile, they started with their swords and bayonets killing us boys. And one of the bayonets just hit me in my right cheek here, and the blood was streaming, not only the blood from my cheek, but the blood from those dead boys, that hot blood coming all over me, and I couldn't scream or I couldn't cry for fear that they would finish the job and kill me again.
They knocked me on the head. I fell down. I don't remember what happened after that. Then when I wake up at midnight, I don't know what the time really was, but approximately, but only I see a moonlight that shine all over. Thousands of people dead over there. And just moon shine on their face, and some of them without clothes, without anything. Then I hear my body messed up cold. My mother was still alive. So he had her head on her lap, on his lap, and brother said, Mom wants some water. So I looked around and found some broken dish or something, run down and got some water and put it in her mouth.
Suddenly, this man felt that a rope with which he was bound was loose, and he jumped up and ran, and with him about some 30 others, but most of them were caught and shot. Our friend ran and ran, and he didn't know where. The reason we found out that those men and boys were being speared and thrown into the trenches was when the young boys, 14, 15 years old, who hadn't been killed, they would dig themselves out of the trenches and come to the town holding their guts hanging out of their bellies because the spears had made holes there and the guts would be hanging out.
We have a very much more authentic report of the 800 just described, but I dare not write it now.
Fearful of the Turks, Mrs. Atkinson carefully scratched out the massacre reference from her diary. Among those who disappeared during the night of June 22nd were college students, professors, artists, musicians, and writers. Most of the Armenian leadership of Harpert was silenced forever. The 5 Fabrikatorian brothers were among those massacred. Their textile factory was destroyed, leaving even the Turkish military without uniforms. The group of Armenians driven out of their homes on the night of June 22, 1915, had been sent to a secret destination. For months, the public did not know where they were exiled, or if they were even alive. A mystery shrouded their disappearance. Those who remained wondered, if the Armenians were being deported to a safe zone, why weren't the Turks also included? Why was it done secretly? The answers to these questions were never clarified by the Turkish authorities in Constantinople. As allies with Germany in the First World War, the Turks had assured the Germans that there was no general order to deport Armenians. On July 17th, a frustrated Johannes Iman wrote again to the German ambassador in Constantinople, disputing this view.
He said that exactly the opposite had happened, that 2 weeks, that is, on the 3rd of July, the general deportation had started in Harpert, and because of the consequences and the fait accompli achieved by the Turkish government, there was not much left to be done.
July 24, the town crier today called from the mosques and around the streets that a Turk who hides an Armenian will be hung and his house will be burnt.
At that time, we were living next door to a friendly Turkish family. Father trusted our neighbor, but he suspected the motives of the government. Twice our family was threatened with deportation. Twice the order was lifted. My father knew it was only a matter of time before we would have to go. He looked to the hills just outside of town.
The Hagopian home was 4 miles from the American hospital. Dr. Mikhail worked there. On the left side was the German orphanage. Dr. Mikhail's farm was as big as the German grounds. The garden was pretty large. There were mulberry trees, apple trees, everything was there.
Finally, the Vali, the governor, notified my father that he was going to deport our family with what he called a good caravan, to have a safe journey. Father knew no one returned from their safe journeys. My parents were torn. I would be killed if I went on the caravan. I might die if they left me behind. Life went on as usual for the Turks, but for the Armenians, death seemed certain just outside of town. On the way to Lake Goljuk, my father had an orchard. It was 10 acres in size and was surrounded by high walls. I remember the mulberry grove. It was hidden by a line of tall poplars. The mulberry trees were planted as a wedding gift to my mother. Now, my father thought this would make a good hiding place for me. He carried me to the middle of the grove, to a dry well. To save my life, he placed me down in it, hoping that the Turks would not find me, and that by a miracle, I would survive. He had great faith in Providence. Time had run out. My parents were ordered to their caravan. I was hidden under the leaves. The mulberry trees shielded the well, or what could have been my grave. I will never know, because during that last night, another high Turkish official got sick. The Turks needed a doctor, my father. My mother ran to the grove. I was taken out of the well.
I'm looking at pictures and papers and documents that my father, Garabed Bedrosian, brought with him when he left Turkey in 1922. When he was in Turkey, he was the bodyguard, that is the Havas, of the American consul, and he traveled with the American consul all over the countryside, and he had great opportunity to observe and to view all of the atrocities, and he worked for the American government about 17 years.
As the American consul to Harput, my father was the only representative of a foreign or neutral nation in that deep interior section of Turkey during the First World War. And as he says in the book, he was not particularly fond of the Armenians, but he reported the facts as he saw them. And he even, at some risk to himself, helped them out by sheltering them at the consulate and taking care of some of their financial problems and protecting them from the brutality of the Turks.
In looking over my father's papers, I came across these many pages of lists of names with amounts of money shown next to them, and these represent monies that were given to Consul Davis to keep for these people who did not know what was going to happen to them. Their belongings had been confiscated, and they were going to be exiled from their villages, and they gave these monies to the council for him to keep for them and to return it to them sometime later if that was possible. If not, they were to give it to relatives in America, and now some of these they had given their addresses. For example, we have one here that says Garabed Golhusyan, $55, deposited on the account of Leslie A. Davis, and so on. And the list, you can see so many names. And then on this front page, there are the addresses of the relatives in the United States.
One day in mid-September, the Turkish bodyguard of Consul Davis confided to Havas Garabed that he knew where the killing grounds were outside of Harpert. Secretly, under the cover of darkness, the consul and his Armenian bodyguard went out to find the missing 800. Meanwhile, on September 18th, the Turkish governor replied to the inquiry he had received earlier from the Special Organization Chief by saying that the job was well done, that 51,000 Armenians had been deported. No mention was made of any killings.
September 24. Consul took a ride to Guljuk. He says that beginning 1.5 hours from here, he began seeing dead bodies, and all along every few yards, mostly women and children. In the lake there were many, and even at our camping place, there were several washed up.
Consul Davis and Havas Garabed, they went way to Golgi. And when they went there, they saw thousands of bodies, all naked. The Kurds take all their clothes and then kill them. And it was such a horrible sight that they were shaken. And my brother-in-law, after they came back, he says, how God could allow such a thing happen. Little children, men and women, they were all slaughtered. And this shook his faith. It took many years later to get his faith back.
A few weeks later, Dr. Atkinson of the American Hospital expressed a desire to make this trip with me. We decided to make a complete tour of the lake this time in order to see what there might be on the other side. We started about 3 o'clock in the morning, one day in the latter part of October. After leaving the village of the Kurds, we climbed a very steep mountain and then descended into the valley on Lake Goljuk.
Lake Goljuk was a day's journey on foot from Harpert. On opposite shores of the lake were 2 villages, one inhabited by Kurds, the other by Armenians. Khacho Khachadurian, a boy of 13 in 1915, lived in the Armenian village. His father was a boat builder and often took people on sightseeing trips. To the end of his life, Khacho would sing the songs of the lake he'd learned as a youth, helping his father. When Turkish troops appeared in the countryside, Khacho's mother knew that deportation and certain death were at hand. Death march or slavery. To save her sons, she decided to give them to a friendly Kurd, knowing her children would be forced to give up their Armenian identity.
Քերի մաղդեսը Մեսրոպ Զիսկովը գանչեց եւ ասավ. Խաչադուր դղաս,
My uncle asked me to come over to him, and he said, "Khachador, my son, you are going to a foreign home. Do not forget your Christian faith. Do not forget your reading and writing. Here, I'm giving you paper, pen, and pencil. Write what happens to you."
Faithful to his uncle, Khacho wrote what he witnessed at the lake. After Khacho died in 1980, his wife found the original draft of his memoirs about his life as a boy on the shores of Lake Goljuk.
We wept bitter tears when we said goodbye to Mother. She said, "Khacho, take care of your little brother." We were leaving behind our loved ones, our relatives, and our playmates. We were close to the Kurd village when suddenly we became terribly homesick. My brother and I ran back to our village, hoping to see our loved ones again. To our sorrow, there was no one there. The Turks had rounded up everybody. We saw them in the distance, climbing a hill. The gendarmes were forcing them along. Our village was empty. Only hungry dogs roamed the streets.
In 1918, Consul Davis sent a report to the U.S. State Department recounting his visit to Khacho's deserted village. The Davis report was declassified in 1987, years after Khacho wrote the same version of the facts. The consul said when he arrived at the village he found not a single inhabitant remained. It was absolutely deserted, except for a few hungry cats.
My father told me this story one day, and I have never forgotten it. He and Consul Davis were riding their horses on a trip along the Goljuk, and as they came up to it, they saw this big book floating in the water. And immediately, my father dismounted from his horse, and he went into the lake and retrieved this big book, and it was dripping with water, but it was still intact. And as he brought it out, he realized that it was the Bible, and that really touched him. And he brought it out and dried the leaves, the pages, as best he could.
We rode along the lake for about 2 hours. The banks of the lake for most of this distance are high and steep, while at the frequent intervals there are deep valleys. In some of the valleys, there were only a few bodies, but in others there were more than 1,000. We estimated that there were no less than 2,000 in that one valley. Many of them were right on the edge of the lake, and their heads showed above the sand. The valley was large, and the bodies were strewn all over it. The bodies were all naked. All right, we estimated that in the course of our ride around the lake, and actually within the space of 24 hours, we had seen the remains of no less than 10,000 Armenians who had been killed around Lake Goljuk. Few localities could be better suited to the fiendish purposes of the Turks in their plan to exterminate the Armenian population than this peaceful lake in the interior of Asiatic Turkey.
Throughout the summer and autumn of 1915, the government continued its policy of genocide. Even more people were massacred at the lake, until Harpert was almost depleted of Armenians. Soldier and civilian Turks participated in the atrocities. Many Kurds helped Armenians escape. More often, though, Kurds were incited by the government to plunder and massacre the Armenians.
Great flocks of Kurds have come to town today, and people are now again full of fear for what's going to happen. They themselves say they have been fetched by the Turks to come and finish off the rest of the Armenians. A number of them were sent to Golchik with some cannons in order to bombard the little island out in the lake where it's said that a number of Armenians are hidden.
Some of the Armenians who swam to safety, to the island in Lake Goljuk, were village friends of Khacho Khachaturian. Khacho remembered the day well. He made a list of the young men and one woman who had fled to the island.
Harutyun Narvaryan, Hovannes Najaryan, Shahbaz Bartabedian, Harutyun Mardigyan, Oryort Sultan der Margozian.
Khacho was now an orphan, a slave, working under his new Kurdish master, Bekir.
Ես ալ նույն վայրերում մեջ կառնուկները գարած էի։
I was herding sheep in the same ravine. Bekir walked up to me, and with a happy look on his face, he said, "Khacho, look how the Turkish soldiers are burning the rebellious infidel Armenians." I looked toward the island where the little church was burning.
By the autumn of 1915, Kharpert was a dismal place. The sword of terror had touched everyone.